Are you able to see my PPT?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So mark it here. Return of the Native, Book 3, The Fascination. Okay, so we move now from this to C. The first chapter, My Mind to Me a Kingdom Is. Now, Hardy gives a more comprehensive description of Klim Yobright here, and he believes that along with education, man's physical beauty, in the classical sense, of course, will be phased out. He further believes this will eventually happen not just to men, but women as well. From his early years, Klims inspired great hopes from his family and community. So he was a very bright kind of a student. After his father's death, a gentleman in Budmouth supported Klim by offering the young man an apprenticeship. And Klim went to London and then to Paris as his career blossomed. So that we come to know. And on the Sunday after Thomason's marriage, which we read already in book 2, Klim joins the Egdon men in the traditional Sunday hair cutting session. Klim reveals to the locals that he has become disenchanted with his life abroad. He says that he has returned to start a school close to Egdon and will study more for necessary qualification. So he's not that kind of a man who would be rather very happy in earning money and making his career. So we notice in the very first chapter of book 3 a kind of moral earnestness in Klim, but at the same time, Hardy also leaves certain suggestions for all of us. That is his lack of humor. And this lack of humor is, by implication, ominous. Now, the title of the book's first chapter, My Mind to Me a Kingdom Is. This is taken from a 16th century poem by Sir Edward Dyer. The poem celebrates the depth of the human mind, its vastness in terms of imagination and refuge for the human spirit. However, the allusion is used ironically since Klim cannot see beyond his own mind in terms of his place in the world, that we will see for ourselves in the succeeding chapters. Klim's ascendancy can be compared to that of Charles Dickens's character Pip from the 1860 novel Great Expectations. In Great Expectations, you have a character called Pip, and there is a kind of a similarity as well as a contrast. Although Klim was not an orphan as Pip was, he had been removed outside his surroundings in an effort to improve his prospects. And he is both improved and compromised by this greater education, because actually that was not up to his mental temperament. Klim eventually sees his life in Paris as idle and vain, much as Pip eventually saw London. Pip is doomed to be an outsider in adulthood, neither comfortable in rich surroundings nor entirely welcomed in common surroundings. And this is a parallel conflict to Klim's. Klim wants to return to the heath. As we noticed, he has come back, and he has not just come back to celebrate the Christmas holidays. However, his was a rather unrealistic plan because he wanted to run a school here. By the end of the novel, Klim will be even more an outsider than he is in Paris. Now, the chapter 2, which is named The New Course Causes Disappointment, is very important. And as Hardy explains, Klim is keen to serve his community, but his educational philosophies are ahead of their time. He is hoping to educate a long established community that is not yet ripe for change. Klim tells Mrs. Yeobright of his plan, but she disapproves of it as a step backwards. She wants more for him. Like any conventional conservative mother, we always have parents who always wish that we go ahead and keep earning bags full of money. So she was like that. He insists that his definition of success is far different from her own. So there I would stop for the time being, sharing this PPT and come to sharing the text with you. So just see now, this is that part of the text which I want you to take note. Are you able to see my text?
Yes, sir.
This is the text, and I have highlighted the portions which are very important for all of you. Mark, in the second chapter of book 3, here you have highlighted the portion which is highlighted. Yeobright's local peculiarity was that in striving at high thinking, he still cleaved to plain living, nay, wild and meager living in many respects, and brotherliness with clowns. You understand? Where is a very clear indication about his imminent conflict with Eustacia. Because Eustacia, we already have read, wants to go and settle in a place like Paris. She has the dream of living a luxurious, fashionable life. And what is the mentality of Yeobright? Yeobright is thinking about doing some missionary job, starting a school for these local poor people, and living a very simple, ordinary life. He was a John the Baptist who took ennoblement rather than repentance for his text. Mark that. And much of this development he may have owed to his studious life in Paris. So he, in fact, learned all about this in Paris. In consequence of this relatively advanced position, Yeobright might have been called unfortunate, because what he really aspires to do and what his surroundings really offer him to do, they do not match. The rural world was not right for him. So he was much advanced of his time. A man should be only partially before his time. To be completely to the vanward in aspirations is fatal to fame. The difficulty is that if you are very, very advanced of your time, people will not understand you. People will not really give the right kind of value to you. And that is exactly what happened with Klim. Now, mark here, if anyone knew the heath well, it was Klim. And here Hardy is describing how there is a beautiful harmony that existed between Klim and the heath, as opposed to the relation that we have marked between the heath and Eustacia. He was permeated with its scenes. Look at that word, permeated, with its substance, with its orders. He might be said to be its product. So that is the reason why the title of the novel is Native, Return of the Native. He is perfectly a native. Right. Now, so he confronts his mother now. He discloses his plan to his mother. I'm not going back to Paris again, mother, he said. I have given up the business. And naturally, Mrs. Yeobright was very, very shocked. I hate that business of mine, and I want to do some worthy thing before I die. As a schoolmaster, I think to do it. A schoolmaster to the poor and ignorant, to teach them what nobody else will. And mother says, after all the trouble that has been taken to give you a start, and when there is nothing to do but to keep straight on towards affluence, you say you will be a poor man's schoolmaster? Your fancies will be your ruin, Klim. Mark that last sentence. Your fancies. This is a mere whim. It's a mere whim. It's a whimsicality. And this is going to ruin you. said the mother. So mother was not at all happy. And now says, mark that, this is a very important statement coming from Klim. I get up every morning and see the whole creation groaning and travailing in pain, as St. Paul says, and yet there am I, trafficking in glittering splendors with wealthy women and titled libertines and pandering to the meanest vanities. I, who have health and strength enough for everything, for anything. I have been troubled in my mind about it all the year, and the end is that I cannot do it anymore. I find it absolutely futile. Playing the role of a manager to a diamond merchant and just attending my customers, absolutely worthless. I don't find any use in that. And Mrs. Yobright says, manager to that large diamond establishment? What better can a man wish for? See the diametrically opposite viewpoints and philosophy. What a post of trust and respect. I suppose you will be like your father, like him. You are getting weary of doing well. Now, she has used the term doing well, and try to understand. This is a very, very important point for discussion. Just for the time being, forget about the text and think about the very concept of doing well in our life. Right? Majority of us, our parents, our elders, everybody, in fact, they consider doing well directly to be related with earning money. And here he says, Clint asked his mother, Mother, what is doing well? And Mrs. Yobright was far too thoughtful a woman to be content with ready definitions like the what is wisdom of Plato's Socrates and the what is truth of Pontius Pilate. So here you have that very interesting kind of a discussion going on, and we are very much aware that, well, the mother and the son, they are not going to match. And then Mark, suddenly, well, we come to know that Christian Cantle comes and reports that what happened in the church was that Susan Nonsuch has pricked Eustacia, thinking Eustacia to be a witch, right? So she has pinched her, she has hurt her, and right naturally, Klim was very disturbed, and the mother and the son started talking about Eustacia. And now Mrs. Yobright says, Miss Vi is to my mind too idle to be charming. Mark, this is the irony. Klim is the only son. And normally, generally, what happens is, as a mother or as a father, we wish that our son and daughter get their life partner as per their wish. But here, Mark, what Mrs. Yobright says, she says, Miss Vi is to my mind too idle to be charming. She's too lazy. I have never heard that she is of any use to herself or to other people. Good girls don't get treated as witches even on Egdon. So this is as per the superstition, right? These people, they consider Eustacia an outsider. She is too tall, she's too good looking, she's educated, and she does all those things, you see, which generally we normally do not find any woman doing in such kind of a locality. Now, nonsense, that proves nothing either way, said you're right. So we understand here that gradually the mother and the son, they start differing on in their opinion about Eustacia. So I go back once again, sharing my PPT with you, and it will help us to think a bit further and quickly. Now, already I have told you that Susan believes Eustacia to be a witch who had bewitched her children. And this was Susan's attempt to stop the evil process. Right. And Mrs. Yobright, we just read she reacted negatively, saying that a good person would not find herself accused of such dark ideas as that. Now, Klim's interest in Eustacia carries a clear potential of conflict. Here you have to understand, gradually, Hardy is telling us about three different very important points for us to keep in mind. And they all are pointing towards a greater conflict in imminent future. What are they? Klim's belief in his evangelizing power, that he is a kind of a missionary, right? He will bring about changes in society, in the life, quality of life of these poor people. His mother's uncompromising and restless materialistic ambition for him, and Eustachia's obsessive desire to leave the heath and go to a place like. So that is what you find till second chapter of the third book. Now in chapter 3, Clint is intrigued to finally meet Eustacia. One day he encounters some locals who are working to recover a bucket that had fallen down Captain Vi's well. So that in fact gives Klim an opportunity or an excuse to go there. Klim offers to bring water to Eustacia for that night, as she refuses to drink from the pool by the house. They talk about events at church, of obviously that event where Susan once had just picked Eustacia, and she admits her bewilderment over such superstitions. Klim asks her if she would like to teach with him. Her response, this is very important, her response that she sometimes hates the locals makes it clear she wants no part in this plan. Please keep yourself muted. Please, all of you, keep yourself muted. There is a sound coming here and there from you, and that is disturbing me. So please keep yourself muted until unless you require to say something. And then Eustacia and Klim, they discuss the heath. And once again, we find another difference, another contrast, another point of incompatibility. Eustacia admits that she hates the heath, except for when it is blossoming. Klim counters that he would rather be on the heath than anywhere else in the world, because we have already read in the second chapter that the heath has permeated, right? Mark that particular word. I mentioned it to you. Permeated, right? He is full with the spirit of the heath. Despite Eustachia's rejection of the idea, Klim is further inspired towards his teaching plan because of her presence. So this is something very natural for a young man to be bewitched by the beautiful Eustacia. And Eustacia is not just beautiful, she's also educated. So naturally, Klim thought that, well, if he would marry Eustacia, Eustacia would obviously provide him with another teacher. Mrs. Yobright is concerned to observe how Eustacia has affected Klim. She is further upset when Klim gives Eustacia a charnel pot. Actually, it is a very interesting kind of an artifact, very ancient, and that was originally intended for Mrs. Yobright, but Klim handed this over to Eustacia, and naturally that upset, that really made Mrs. Yobright a bit upset. She became angry. She calls Klim's scheme for the school and his attraction to Eustacia foolish. That is, you find in the third chapter. And the third chapter, in fact, covers almost 3 months. The recovery of the lost bucket, the main occasion where the growing friendship develops, is beautifully written and shows the Egdon community actively helping one another, stylistically making an interesting contrast to what has gone before, yet at the same time blending with it. always keep one thing in mind, that Hardy, to Hardy, the rustics, they also are very important. And when especially he is talking about Egdon, a native place, and talking about the return of the native, well, he cannot really imagine this to be possible without blending the story of Clement Eustacia or Mrs. Yeobright in Thompson with the rustics. In Eustacia, Mrs. Yeobright can see only pride and conceit. The irony is that she has totally forgotten that if she finds them objectionable, this pride and conceit, perhaps in herself, she has both pride and conceit. Chapter 4 now develops the relationship into a love affair. Eustacia becomes passionate and she is excited to be with Clem, and Clem admits he loves her, but that his mother disapproves. So, well, that relationship is taken forward. He proposes marriage now, but Eustacia wants to have some time. And he asked him to talk to her of Paris. Once again, that is very important. On one hand, Clem and Eustacia love each other. But the difficulty is that Clem wants to come back from Paris and settle around Egdon. Eustacia hates Egdon. She wants to go to a place like Paris. And therefore, when the proposal of marriage is given by Clem, Eustacia wants some time and she wants him to talk about Paris. He dislikes the subject and tries to discuss their future, but she is persisting in her request. Finally, what Klim does, right? He just weaves a kind of a dream. We will come to that later on. However, Eustacia promises to marry him if he promises that they can return to Paris sometime in future. Klim avoids that topic very subtly and drops a hint that it is only the possibility of Paris that attracts Eustacia to him. She denies his claim and insists that she would gladly spend her days in a hermitage so long as they were together. Very interesting, right? So, mark that this is exactly what happens when there is an infatuation. They are not in love. And if you remember, I earlier pointed this to you, especially about Eustacia. Eustacia actually does not love any particular person. She has a definite idea about love. In fact, for that matter, all of us have a certain idea of love in our mind. And when we find anybody coming pretty close to fulfilling that idea, we fall in love. So Klim realizes that both his mother and Eustacia want him to return to Paris. That is the tragedy. There are two women in his life, mother and the would-be wife, and both want him to go back to Paris, whereas he himself hates Paris. He is aware of the challenge that will come in trying to please the three primary people in his life. Who are three? Himself, his mother, and his would-be wife. Now, because they are infatuated to one another, try to understand the meaning of infatuated. Infatuation মানে মোহ, যেটাকে আমরা বলি মোহগ্রস্ত হয়ে যাওয়া. It's not really in love. Klim and Eustacia have little in common mentally, but they are equally ready to forget this difference, at least for the time being, because they are now intoxicated in their physical attraction. And they also hope, mark that, they hope that the troublesome issues will miraculously disappear. অনেক সময় আমরা এটা করি, right? Sometimes we do this. Sometimes when a danger comes, we feel by closing our eyes, the danger can disappear, right? The chapter 5 now further elaborates the unhappiness of Mrs. Yeobright. Once she is unhappy to hear that Clem and Eustacia are to be married. She once again confronts her son, and he explains his plan to instill high knowledge into empty minds. This is quote unquote, obviously taken from the text. They have an emotional argument, and Clem leaves the house. Right? Just think about the excitement that the mother had when she first heard that Clem was returning to celebrate his Christmas with her. And now, within just a few months, the situation has so drastically changed that now the mother and the son, they are always arguing. He had intended to broker a meeting between Mrs. Yeobright and Eustacia in an attempt to improve their relationship. Instead, Clem meets Eustacia and repeats his proposal of marriage, promising they will live in a small cottage on the heath for only 6 months, after which time they will move to Budmouth to start a school. So Budmouth at least is a kind of a better place, in one way better, fashionable place, at least much better than the Egdon. Eustacia agrees. As she leaves him, he reflects on how he no longer sees her as a goddess, but as an actual woman for whose welfare he is now responsible. This is a very important part. I would request you to look at the end of chapter 5, uh, named Sharp Words Are Spoken and a Crisis Ensues. At the end of the chapter, there you have, I'm just reading it out. Eustacia was now no longer the goddess, but the woman to him, a being to fight for, support, help, be maligned for. Now that he had reached a cooler moment, he would have preferred a less hasty marriage. Interesting. Had he reflected properly, then perhaps he would not have gone to marry Eustacia hurriedly. But the card was laid, but it's too late. It's too late. Already the proposal has been made. Already he has made up his mind. He has already promised, and he determined to abide by the game. Mark. So just see how chance determines life. And it is really an impulsive action. The breach between the mother and the son is close to being unbridgeable. In contrast, the spring weather, that is where what is described here, which is used to symbolize the growing affection between Clem and Eustacia. So on one hand, you have the breach between the mother and the son, and we understand it's not going to be easily bridged up again. And on the other, Hardy describes the spring weather, obviously telling us about the blossoming of relationship between Eustacia and Clem. Chapter 6, Clem officially leaves his mother's house on the next morning. He has found an empty cottage on the heath where he will live alone until he and Eustacia are married. The wedding day is set for June 25th. You have to remember that date. Mrs. Yeobright tells him she will not likely attend, she is not going to attend it. So she will not likely to attend the marriage of her only son. Mark the ego. One of the greatest barriers, in our relationship is our vanity and our ego. After Clem leaves, Mrs. Yeobright sits alone. Thomasin arrives to ask her aunt for money. That's again another very interesting development that has taken place in chapter 6 of book 3. She is hardly married 6 months ago, and she has come back precisely to ask for money. And she does not want Wilddeep to know of the request. Why? We learn that Wilddeep does not allow Thomasin to have sufficient money in her hands to run the domestic chores. And she's afraid to broach the subject with him. Mrs. Yeobright is not pleased with what this suggests about their marriage, but she tells Thomason how she has saved 100 guineas, 50 for Thomason and 50 for Clym. But Mrs. Yeobright insists that Thomason discuss the subject with Wiley before accepting the money, right? So the aunt is absolutely right that the husband and wife must know that she is going to get this 50 guineas from Mrs. Yeobright. Meanwhile, Wiley hears of Eustatia's impending marriage, and he finds this his old feeling for her surface once again. Now, Clem's journey to the cottage, which he has decided to take by way of contrast, shows nature in another of its moods. Always remember, you should not read the novel Return of the Native purely on the storyline. You see, after all, we are forced by the constraint of the time to just go through the important aspects of the novel, to know the storyline, to proceed with the development of the plot, analyzing the characters, and etc. But at the same time, I just want to draw your attention to different descriptions, poetic descriptions often, description of nature. And here in this chapter, you have nature in another mood. The sensitivity Hardy shows in describing a stormy day in June is as remarkable as a comparison of Thomason to a series of birds in the later part of this chapter. The fact that Thomason has married more out of a sense of duty rather because of any affection for Wiley is borne out when we gather that her married life after only 6 months seems less than ideally happy. Because it's not just a question that Wiley does not give money to her, it's a question that she cannot really share it with Wiley, and she has to come back to her aunt asking for money. And uh, obviously, she is not at all a woman who wants a lavish life. So the minimum requirements are also not met with by Wiley. At the end of the chapter, Wiley's reaction to the news of Eustatia's approaching marriage is again a reminder that marriage with Thomason has not really ended his philandering nature, right? And he still has cherished in his mind somewhere or the other a kind of a weakness for Eustacia. So try to understand how you have different kind of complex situations being created. Thomason, Redelman loves Thomason, but Redelman could not marry Thomason. Thomason rather was forced to marry Wiley, more to save the face of Mrs. Yeobright, and what lest the society should say something or the other. And now we are going to have another marriage, which also does not seem to be a very happy one. Chapter 7, Clym and Eustatia's wedding day arrives. Mrs. Yeobright does not attend, as she has already told. Instead, she waits at home for Thomason, who has written to ask for money again. Wiley arrives, having been sent by Thomason to fetch the gift of 50 guineas. Mrs. Yeobright correctly intuits that she has an intuition that Thomason has not told him what he is fetching. Mrs. Yeobright could understand that perhaps Thomason has not told Wiley everything about this 50 guineas and all, and so she refuses to give it to her son-in-law, that is Wiley. He is annoyed but suspicious and leaves. Mrs. Yeobright now does something which is very, very unexpected of her. She contemplates a decision not to hand over the guineas. And then she decides that she will ask Christian Cantle, one of the rustics, perhaps who has never seen even one guinea in his own life. Now she decides that she will rather hand over the 50 guineas to Christian Cantle, not just 100, not the 50 guineas, rather the whole of the 100 guineas to Christian Cantle, and ask Christian Cantle to carry it to Thompson and Klim. She wants actually to give 50 guineas each to Thompson and Klim as her marriage gift to them. And this is really very, very unexpected and almost melodramatic, because a woman like Mrs. Yeobright, she will make such an error is really difficult to logically accept. Christian is told not to hand the guineas to anyone other than to Thomason or Klim. Christian sets off on his mission, but is diverted by a raffle for a gown piece decided through dice. So, at one place there they were playing dice, and Christian, as is very natural for him to be attracted by the gambling. So he was attracted by the game of gambling, and he wins the piece. And always remember, right, the danger of gambling is that you win, right? If you win in a gamble, that is more dangerous than if you lose. Right at the beginning, if you lose, it is better, because that might take you away from gambling. But if you gamble and win, it might ruin you. So he wins the piece, but is captivated by the power of the dice. And dice is the devil. He admits to Wiley, who is also there, that he holds a significant sum of money from Mrs. Yeobright, intended for Thompson. So unwittingly, he has said this to Wiley, and you can understand the reaction of Wiley. Christian is too simple to consider that Thomason's husband is meant to be kept oblivious. Wiley is angry, very natural, that Mrs. Yeobright cannot trust him and can trust this kind of a rustic. Right. From the shadows, Diggory overhears their conversation. So again, that is again another chance and coincidence, right? Wiley challenges Cantle to play dice with the money, arguing that even if he wins, the money will still be in the hands of the proper family. So whether it is with Thomason or Wiley, after all, they are husband and wife. So Christian Cantle need not worry. Let them play the dice. Christian quickly loses Thomason's 50 guineas and plays on with Klim's share. Just imagine. This is what actually gambling does. This is the reason why addiction is bad. Because addiction is bad, why? Because we forget where we should stop. As he loses everything, Diggory enters from the shadows again. Melodramatic, another chance and coincidence. The chapter reveals Hardy's fatalistic view of the world. Well, man proposes and God disposes. The choice of Christian to carry the guineas is hardly credible. That's the reason I told you that, well, it seems to be rather melodramatic, rather, if not impossible, improbable, right? Wiley's deep strategy by which he obtains the guineas makes him appear almost satanic, and Redelman's appearance is melodramatic, because just when Redelman's presence is needed, no one knows from where he comes. So the final chapter of book 3, chapter 8. Now Diggory then challenges Wiley to play on. After all, Wiley has won all the 100 guineas from Christian Cantle. And Redelman, being in love with Thompson, cannot really allow this. So he must win the guineas. So he reappears, nobody knows from where. Right at that moment, He plays again the game of dice with Wildie and wins all 100 guineas back from Wildie. Diggory gives all of the guineas to Thomasin without knowing that actually 50 guineas only belong to Thomasin and the rest 50 to Clem. Hardy prophesies that this innocent error will have tragic consequences. So, unwittingly, we do something, we do not know what might happen, but then this can happen any moment, right? So, okay, so there we end today our discussion. Now it's up to you to tell me if you have anything to ask. So I have already covered your book 3. I have tried to uh, give you a synopsis of the important points. I have tried to analyze also important aspects. And now, if you have any question to ask me, have any question to ask me? Could you understand all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And hopefully you have read the third book, because see, if you don't read, then it's difficult to make you understand everything, because in a limited time frame, I am not given that option to read the novel with you. So just I have read one particular chapter and wanted you to read other parts as and when you read the book thoroughly, line by line. So thank you, everybody. I end it here. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.